can you all hear me? Is that working? Yes. It's funny actually, this is the scene of my first ever conference talk, was Jeremy put me on this stage. So sorry on behalf of Jeremy to everybody for giving me this platform. So yes, for those of you that don't know me or that haven't met before, I'm Amy and I am a content design and design systems consultant based here in the UK. Over the last sort of 8 years or so, I've been mainly focusing on design systems and working for different organisations like the UK government, BT, which also includes EE and PlusNet, Springer Nature, Camden Council, Wayflyer, Backmarket, and right now I'm working with the BBC. But today, I'm actually not going to be talking to you about any of that. Instead, I'm going to be talking to you about existential crisis. Hands up if you're having one. Yeah, almost unanimous. Cool. So yeah, as Remy said, this is not actually the first time that I've given this talk. The very first time I gave this talk was in September last year at State of the Browser, which is lovely Dave and the Red Hat His conference. It's a really cool indie tech conference in London. It is running on the 29th of March next year. I did my research and everything. And you can buy tickets now, and you definitely should, because we should all support the indie conference scene as best we can. Yes. So, yeah, it was pretty well received, I think. But when I did give the talk before, something surprising happened. So the talk was shared on social media, as all the talks were. And it turned out to be one of the more popular talks I've given, which was great. So imagine my excitement when I discovered that the video of the talk had made it 5,000 miles across the pond to this man, Paul Vanderklay, who lives in Sacramento in California. And Paul, who you'll notice looks a little bit like a child's drawing of Santa, is actually a pastor for the Living Stones Christian Reformed Church, which, based on my subsequent interactions with them, are a collective of absolute legends. So despite being, I assume, sort of quite a busy man, Paul took an hour and 20 minutes out of his schedule to dissect my 25-minute talk for his followers in this enlightening critique called The Meaning Crisis and the Liberationist Social Justice Nihilism Loop, which is a lot of words to say when you're quite nervous. So in the video, in which he diagnoses me on several occasions as mentally unwell, and he's not wrong, to be fair, and is still available on YouTube if you'd like to watch it. But just to kind of summarise his analysis, it seems that sort of Paul's main concern is that when I hit this point of existential crisis I'm going to talk to you about today, there were, it seems, two routes available to me. So the one that I naively took was to re-engage with my core values and to allow me to kind of rediscover my sense of purpose and understand, like, why am I doing what I'm doing in the first place. But the one that I should have taken, Paul explains, was to find God and have babies. So, yeah, what a silly sausage I felt. That was annoying. But the upshot of all of this was that Paul's amplification of my talk did give me some testimonials, which I can now use to kind of whet your appetite for what's about to come. So like this one from Britty B6615, who says, "What a boring woman." She does go on to note, to be fair to her, that she too is boring and bored with her career, but at least she doesn't make power comms about it. And then, as an important clarification, she does confirm that she has nothing against power pouring. So that's what a relief. So then we have Rocket Pig 1914, who says appalling language she used throughout as well. I think for full disclosure, I maybe drop an F-bomb twice in this talk. Shamelessly tearing at the proper rules of etiquette for a few cheap laughs. The ashes of civilization. Which I just love the hyperbole of it. And then my favourite comment of all, just because of how much he manages to pack in, Comes from Benoit Lapierre 1315, who's since deleted his comment I discovered this morning, but luckily I screenshotted it first, who summarizes me as, take a deep breath, extremely sad, 9 to 5, no mother instinct, no marriage, no intimacy, trauma bound to an undisclosed secret, a humour that hide pain, a doer alpha mentality, afraid of elitism in certain demographic, absence of sacred feminine figure, all of which amounts to a perfect recipe, he explains, for, I assume what he's trying to say here is covert narcissistic depression. Who needs grammar anyway? So yeah, when you receive this kind of criticism online, the best thing to do really is just brush it off and take the high road and ignore it. These people don't know you, their opinion ultimately doesn't matter. And unfortunately, I'm far too petty for that. So I had it put on a bloody t-shirt. So, thanks. These are available to buy on Hayden Pickering's online store, and they make perfect presents for your grandma. So, God, I love my job. Anyway, that's quite enough of Paul van der Kleij and his disciples for one day, I think. So let's get back to my favourite subject as the narcissist I am, me. So, historically, I've been someone who has derived a lot of meaning from my work, and I have worked hard. So, like a complacent little cog in the capitalist machine we're all working in, I have diligently reduced my identity to my professional endeavours and made work my entire personality. And I enjoyed it, right? Work has provided me with purpose and meaning, and it was something I consistently felt motivated by, regardless of whatever was going on in my personal life. So it was a bit of a curveball for me when in April last year, I found myself feeling a bit out of sorts. As I wrapped up my 2-year engagement with my then client, I realised that I was in this kind of strange and unfamiliar territory. And as I started thinking about my next move and thinking about maybe what I wanted to work on and what I wanted my next gig to look like, I was struck with this very unnerving realisation, which was, I don't care. I don't care anymore about design systems. I don't care about content design. I don't care about tech or work. I just don't really care about any of it anymore. And as much as I kind of tried, I literally couldn't find a single shit to give about work. And that was just really, really unusual for me. I didn't know what to do with that. And so I thought, okay, I've been quite flat out. I had been working hard. Maybe I just need a break. So I decided intentionally I was going to take a couple of months off to just recharge and think about what to do next. So I took some trips. I went to Paris. I drank wine with my best friend, and I had the most luxurious hangover of my entire life in a fancy hotel. I went to Amsterdam. I got cataclysmically high to the point where I couldn't feel my legs anymore. And I took photos of bicycles propped up against railings. And I took days off to go to nice Instagrammable art galleries in London and tried to kind of reignite some creative energy. But at the end of it all, I still found myself here, staring into the void, feeling empty and uninspired and just kind of lacking motivation, just lacking that kind of drive to get back into work. And this was starting to worry me now, right? So I brought out the big guns. In an effort to try and understand exactly where this blockage was coming from, I started journaling. I wrote pages and pages of introspection. I wrote these streams of consciousness and I made lists and I really tried to delve into my psyche to make sense of why I'd hit this metaphorical brick wall. And as I journaled, I started to notice this theme reoccurring on the pages, this kind of persistent thought that kept coming up over and over. And what it was when I thought about work, the overriding sentiment that I had was, it all means nothing in the end. In the end, none of it really matters. Design systems, content design, tech, work, it's all just meaningless nonsense. She's here to inspire. But it is all just meaningless nonsense, right? It is, if we're being really honest, right? At some point in the next 10 or 20 or 100 years, no one will remember any of this. So why bother? And this was quite a big turn of events for me. As I say, I had been very sort of career focused. So let's take a few steps back now and look at what it was that led me here. How did I, this career-driven person, get to this point of total disengagement? Well, there's a few factors. So the first is that I had been dealing with a series of personal events, which I'm not going to talk about in detail here, but suffice to say, they definitely contributed to this sense of insignificance around my career. I had lots of change to navigate in my personal life outside of work, so it's not really surprising that my career fell down to the bottom of my priority list. And this has been especially tricky because in January 2020, I decided to leave my last permanent role and start consulting. So I set up my own company called Frankly Design, and I began working with external clients. And on the whole, this has been a really good move for me. It's something that I'm really proud of, but it has definitely shifted things in terms of the way that I get a sense of my progress. So I don't have a boss anymore. I don't have one-to-ones. I don't have performance reviews or salary bands or seniority levels to think about in the same way that I did before when I was permanent. And I guess I underestimated how much those things gave me a sense of my progress and gave me a framework to kind of measure my success by and a sense of sort of how I was doing. And without them, I often feel like I'm drifting or even sort of flatlining. So how do I know if I'm progressing? And what does a good year look like when I'm the only person at my company Christmas party? I don't really have Christmas parties by myself, just in case anyone's worried. And then there's the focus of my career itself. So does anybody in the room work in or around design systems? Okay, I'm so sorry for you. So for those of you who do, you'll know that sometimes they can feel like a real uphill struggle. They often involve a lot of organisational change, which has this effect of making those of us who work on them feel as though we're constantly kind of working against the people and the organisations that we're in. And when we're successful, this work can be immensely gratifying, but we're not always successful. And even when we are, the journey to get there can often leave us feeling quite burnt out and depleted. And that's definitely what happened to me last year. And to compound this, and I can see that the next slide has not updated from an edit I made this morning. So you are just going to look at a grey screen now, but it's fine, I can say some words. The state of the tech industry right now. So if the offensive lack of diversity, the incessant bloviating about JavaScript frameworks, the willful ignorance, I don't think in this room so much, but in general regarding accessibility, ChatGPT, Elon fucking Musk, weren't enough to make you want to crawl into a very deep, dark hole, we then had to deal with this huge spate of widespread layoffs. And on top of this, the world is on fire. So, we've had a pandemic, we've had a climate crisis, we've had rising and increasingly mainstream racism and attacks on trans people, we've had horrific wars and acts of violence live streamed straight into our phones, and this low rumbling threat of nuclear Armageddon. Not to mention, of course, just a couple of days ago, Donald Trump re-elected. I can't make a joke about this. It's not funny. I'm gutted, and I'm sure all of us in this room feel that way. And so, the last few years, to borrow a quote from Succession, has really been quite the shit show at the fuck factory. So this point in particular is something that I know has impacted the relative importance of work for a lot of us. So I'm sure some of you remember this spate of articles and heated Twitter discussions that happened back in 2022 about quiet quitting. This apparent kind of tidal wave of employees mentally checking out and viewing work with increasing cynicism and just reducing their input to the bare minimum required to keep their jobs. So we saw article after article talking about this collective end of ambition, this widespread change in our attitudes to work, and this kind of exponential trend in people rejecting the idea that our careers should be a source of fulfillment and purpose, and choosing instead to concentrate on more meaningful things like our friends and our family and our hobbies and stuff that we enjoy outside of work. And I'm going to say now that I firmly believe that caring less about work is completely fine. We have been served this idea for such a long time of sort of hustle culture and the idea that our careers are deserving of the absolute majority of our energy and attention and time, and they should be our main concern. And we've been completely overfed this kind of glamorized portrayal of work. And I think a lot of us have just had enough. And I absolutely think that that's okay. But I also think that making work completely meaningless is probably not going to make us happy either. Because the hard fact is that most of us still will have to work the best proportion of a 9-to-5 day, 4 or 5 days a week, to survive, because capitalism. And although I don't want to dissuade anyone from instigating a socialist revolution, I suspect that for most of us right now, that's probably, who's got the energy? Hopefully someone has, but not me right now. So what do we do about it, right? So if we do have to keep working, how do we make it mean something? I actually wrote these exact words, it all means nothing in the end, in my journal one day. And as I looked at them, something else, so this new idea started to emerge for me. So something to do with means and ends. And what I realised was that I had lost my sense of purpose. So my work, which had once been this vehicle for my values and the things that I actually cared about, had become work for the sake of work. And my career, which had once just been a means to an end, had become the end itself. And that is what I needed to change. I realised that I had to take a step back and think about why I'd started working in this space in the first place. So what was it about design systems and content design and a career in tech that drew me in? And that I saw as a kind of opportunity to make the kind of mark that I wanted to make in the world. And as I was thinking about this, I remembered an exercise that I did as part of a coaching course a few years ago. So the course was called the Courageous Leadership Program, and it was run by Sarah Wachter-Becher, who some of you might be familiar with as the author of Technically Wrong and the co-author of Design for Real Life, which she wrote with Eric Meyer. And I want to make super clear, I'm not being sponsored by Sarah. I'm just a massive fangirl of her services and her books. And I'd really recommend engaging with her work if you haven't, because it's had a huge impact on my perspective and my approach to work. But in the course, Sarah talks about finding your core perspective, and she defines this as the intersection of your skills, experiences, and values. And it's the combination of these three factors that gives us our unique lens on the world and usually informs the career path that we decide to take. So for me, they look like this. The things I'm good at are communication, working with other people, being perceptive of the needs of the people around me and that I encounter in my day-to-day work. I'm quite analytical. And I'm a good systems thinker, so I can see how different people and parts and processes connect to each other and to a bigger whole. And then in terms of my experiences, so very early on in my career, I remember feeling completely bewildered by this kind of corporate jargon that was being thrown around at the company I was working for. So I was quite junior, I was hearing all these acronyms and obscure project names and this plethora of strange terminology that made me feel like I was just less capable and less knowledgeable than people around me. And it took me a while to realise that it wasn't me, right? That this kind of language is just alienating by design. And I became really determined to try and rally against that and advocate for clear language for the remainder of my career. Then I worked in hospitality in my teens, which meant that I got really good at building relationships and dealing with difficult customers, which has been incredibly valuable as a consultant. And on top of that, I also didn't really have the easiest childhood. It definitely could have been worse, but my parents separated when I was really young. I was quite an anxious and quiet child. Hard to imagine now, I know. And I was bullied quite badly for a bit of time in secondary school. And all of this made me quite sensitive in, I now think, a really good way to the struggles that people face. And it left me wanting to do something that would make a difference to the lives and the quality of lives of other people. And these experiences informed my values. So, this This should be appearing one by one, and I fixed it this morning, but now it's reverted, it's fine. But yeah, okay, I care about inclusivity. So I really feel like everybody has the right to access the services and information that they need and to participate in the spaces that they work in. And I try to champion and exhibit vulnerability because I think that doing that connects us and helps others to open up and bring their whole selves to work. I try to work hard to make things more equitable, to shift power away from those that have far too much of it into the hands of those that find themselves systematically disadvantaged and discriminated against wherever I can. And I also believe in transparency, that as individuals and organisations, we should be honest and transparent about what we're doing and why. And something that I want to add and acknowledge to this point is that all of this is underpinned by something else about me, which is that I have a lot of privilege. So I am a woman, which isn't always a picnic, but I'm also white, I'm financially secure, I'm educated, I'm still just about young enough to be considered relevant in tech, and I'm not disabled. And I have to acknowledge that, and I have to decide what I'm going to do with that. And so from here, I wrote a statement that aims to kind of bring all those things together. So this is my core perspective. As someone in a position of relative power and privilege who has experienced exclusion, I want to champion inclusivity. I believe that people can bring value and make positive change when they are validated and empowered to participate. So this, I believe, is my purpose. This is the end goal. This is what I actually care about. And content design and design systems and the work that I do are just really my current best means of achieving it, but they're not the end goal itself. And I realised that I needed to start holding myself accountable to this to find value and meaning in my work again. But having a purpose in isolation isn't really much use. It's not really enough just to know what our purpose is. To actually find meaning, we have to find ways to fulfill that purpose, and that means setting goals. So let's talk about that. So there's lots of different models and frameworks for setting goals, and most of them make me want to push forks into my eyes. So here is what I like to think about. When I'm setting goals, I like to ask myself, does this goal connect to my purpose? So do I actually care about achieving this goal? Is this a goal that I actually can achieve? And how will I know if I'm making progress? So let's look at each of these, starting with goals that connect to purpose. So as a reminder, my purpose comes from this core perspective I wrote. And the important bits for me here are that I want to champion inclusivity and that I want to validate and empower people. So when I'm setting goals, I need to think about whether they connect me to this. So let's look at a goal that I started last year with. I decided that I wanted to work on a design system that enables localization. Which, if for those of you that don't know, that's for design systems that are used in kind of multiple different languages and can then kind of be easily translated into the different localities that they're used in. So if I'm honest, I'm not all that intrinsically interested in this, but as somebody who works at the intersection of content design and design systems, this is something that I'd quite like to be able to say that I have done. And I don't know a lot of design systems that do this well. I know a few, but I figured I could, it would help me. It would help my career if I could do this. But it doesn't really have any connection to my purpose. It's just a portfolio piece. And so a better goal, and one that I am working towards now, is to work on design systems that prioritise accessibility and inclusion, even over aesthetics. And this might involve content localization, right? I don't have to take that out of the mix completely if it's for a global organisation, but it's not the point of it. The point is to make sure that I'm using design systems work as a mechanism for making the kind of impact that I'm interested in making. Now, this is one of many goals I could have chosen to connect me to my purpose, but it's actually one that I get fired up about. It's one that I care about, and it's one that I actively want to pursue, which leads me on to having goals that I actually care about achieving. So another goal that I could have set myself, and one that I've thought about many times over the years, is learning to code. So I'm in that funny position of working in a very technical space, but not being a developer. And so learning how to code, I thought, would empower me to kind of build some of the things that I'd like to build without needing outside support. It seems like quite a cool thing to be able to do. Congratulations to all of you who know how to do it. Very impressive to me. And if I could make that code accessible and performant, then of course it connects me straight to my purpose. But what I kind of came to realize is there's actually a reason I'm not a developer. I actually like being a content designer and a team leader sometimes, and working with brilliant developers that I know I can count on to take care of the code. When it comes to code, the thing that I do care about is documentation. I know lots of people hate it, but I'm a docs nerd, I love it. And so a much better goal for me is to focus my efforts on training developers on how to write docs in a way that are inclusive. And so I started doing this last year, and honestly, it gave me so much energy. Writing and running training was very much a new skill for me, but it's one that I actually felt kind of fired up about acquiring. And even though it took me out of my comfort zone, I knew it was still in my capabilities to do, which leads me on to, are my goals actually achievable? So we're often encouraged to shoot for the moon when we're goal setting, to set our sights kind of ridiculously high on the basis that even if we don't quite achieve what we set out to, we'll discover that our abilities far outstretch what we had imagined. But honestly, and I know this isn't a particularly sexy take and wasn't very popular with Pastor Paul's viewers, fuck moonshots. Thanks. Moonshots came straight from the capitalism playbook, and I hate them. I just am not interested in aiming for an unattainable vision. All that does is wear us down. And the thing about setting achievable goals is that you actually get to feel a sense of achievement rather than thinking about all the things that you didn't manage to do. I am not interested in laying a trap for myself to fail and then burning myself out in the process. So an example of this that I genuinely wrote down at the start of last year was to write a book about how design systems can contribute to systemic harm. Just casual, thought I'd, in the middle of the most burnt out year of my life, gonna knock out a book. This is actually something I want to do. It's a subject that I feel really passionately about, and it's actually relevant to my purpose. But if I expanded on this question slightly to ask, is this a goal that I can actually achieve given my current resources, time, and energy? The answer is absolutely fucking not. The fact that I just do not have the bandwidth to write a book right now, that's relevant. I'm too burnt out, and I know that all setting this goal would do is make me feel like a failure. So instead, I decided to make a podcast about it. This was a much more attainable way for me to explore and communicate about this subject. And I did it. It's called Systems of Harm, if you'll indulge me in a quick shameless plug. It's available on all good podcasting platforms, I think. And the nice thing about this goal is that it was very specific and measurable. So I set myself the goal of making and publishing a 6-episode series, and I did it. Which, oh no, honestly. Thank you, you're so kind. God, I really can't deal with people being nice to me. And so this links me onto my kind of final consideration, which was, how will I know if I'm making progress? So not all goals are as sort of finite and definitive as making a podcast. Sometimes we just want to deepen our knowledge on a subject or develop our skills in a certain area. And these kind of goals are often harder to measure. But it's so important that we can see that we're making progress. Not doing so is a recipe for burnout, and I'll explain why. So the term burnout, if you're not aware, was first coined by a psychologist called Herbert Freudenberger in 1975, and it was characterized by 3 components. The first one was emotional exhaustion, this fatigue that comes from caring too much for too long. The second was depersonalization, which is the depletion of empathy, caring, and compassion. And finally, we have a decreased sense of accomplishment. So this unconquerable sense of futility, feeling that nothing that you do actually makes any difference. And it's this third component that makes it so important for us to support our goals with progress markers. If we don't, we're just running on a treadmill and we're taking actions without any real sense of moving forward. And it's exhausting. It uses our energy and it leaves us with no real sense of satisfaction or reward. So what we've learned, I think, is that this core purpose combined with our goals that help us fulfill that purpose and a way of then measuring our progress against those goals are what helps to give our work meaning. That's what I have discovered. But there is a really important caveat to this. And that is that this is only true if these things come from within us genuinely and not from other people or institutions. So we can't rely on external sources to tell us what matters and whether or not we're moving in the right direction. And this really brings me on to the last thing that I want to talk about today, which is disconnecting from external validation. So a really hard realization that I came to last year is that I had relied far too much for too long on other people to give me a sense of myself. I really have needed recognition and praise and acknowledgement to make me feel valid and successful. And I have done things that I didn't really want to do or care about in pursuit of other people's approval. And one way that I was kind of confronted with this was becoming self-employed. So as I mentioned, I stopped working in-house just over 4 years ago now. And it's only recently, in light of this kind of burnout and existential crisis, that I began to realise how much any sense of purpose or progress had historically come from corporate career progression frameworks. So without someone else telling me that I'm exceeding expectations or acknowledging my work with a pay rise or a bonus, or changing my job title to move me up the ranks of some professional ladder that somebody else has defined, how do I know if I'm doing a good job? And even though I moved away from this in quite an absolute way, I think this is quite a helpful question for us all to ask. Because if our only sense of validation comes from our employers giving us pay rises or promotions or good performance reviews, and then the absence or removal of those things is guaranteed to leave us feeling invalid. And I'm not saying that these things aren't important, they are. We all need money to live and we all need feedback and positive reinforcement. But I think a question for us to ask is how much power do we want to give to these things? If we make them the sole metrics against which we measure our sense of achievement and the things that we allow to kind of motivate us, then we're really putting our whole sense of self-worth entirely on something that could be taken away. And that leaves us in quite a vulnerable position. And this definitely wasn't the only way that I was overvaluing external validation, she says to you from a stage. So, like a lot of us, I expect, I was using social media to give me a sense of validation, in particular Twitter, RIP, or X nowadays, Mastodon, Blue Sky, Threads. Lest we forget how we've all got crawling back to LinkedIn. Of all the abhorrent things Elon Musk has done, the way he has forced me to re-engage with LinkedIn is something I will never forgive. So I used to share a lot of my work on Twitter, chasing these kind of dopamine hits of likes and comments and engagement to make me feel successful. But the recent sort of fragmentation of the social media landscape has really highlighted how flimsy it all is. And if validating ourselves with corporate gold stars puts us in a precarious position, then looking to social media to give us a sense of self-worth is even more risky because, as we've all seen, it can so easily be taken away, although it is now popping off on Blue Sky, so get yourself on there if you're not already. But again, we have to ask ourselves, how do I know if I'm doing well, if I'm not collecting likes? Because the other thing about using engagement or other types of external validation as a means of motivation or a measure of success is that it's a race to the bottom. It will never really feel like enough. Am I happier now? Was I happier having sort of 10,000 odd followers on social media than when I had 10? Or if a tweet got 100 likes instead of 3? Not really, honestly. I just became desensitized to it, and it took more and more to make me happy. It has been designed that way. If it could be completed, then we wouldn't keep going back to it. So it keeps us on this kind of hedonic treadmill. It is, to put it bluntly, this unwinnable game that is designed to make us feel shitter the more we play. It is the poison that promises to be the antidote. Having said all of that, I want to acknowledge that we will never completely stop needing external validation. We are a social species, and we do need each other, and we all need acknowledgement from time to time. But what I'm saying is, to cultivate true meaning, we have to answer to ourselves first and foremost. So, where does all of this leave us? How do I cultivate my sense of meaning now, if not from other people's approval? I ask myself a few questions. Am I fulfilling my purpose? Is what I'm doing day to day making the kind of difference that I want to make in the world? Am I making progress against my goals? Even if these goals are quite modest, or my steps towards them are minuscule, am I moving forwards in the right direction? Am I looking a bit less like this traumatized fox? Getting there. And most importantly of all, am I enjoying how I'm spending my time? Is any of it actually making me happy and inspired and energized and connected to people, and all of those things I really want to feel as much as I possibly can? I think the last point is important, and it's where I'm going to finish up today. I started this talk by saying that it all means nothing in the end. And in some ways I still think that's true. I do hope that I'll get to make some kind of a difference in my brief stint on Earth. But one day I'm going to die, sorry to tell you, and I won't be taking any of it with me. I do believe that the mark that we make matters. And if I've made a difference to the things that I want to change by the time my number's up, then I'll be a bit happier. But the means do matter too. How we get there matters. We need to know where we're heading, and we need to derive meaning from the journey and the destination. And the good news is that we get to decide that. It all means nothing in the end, but only if you let it. Thank you.